All right, we're back for Be a Refuge. We love sharing stories and processing and talking about the refuge community as we learn and practice and dream together. And it's been really fun for me, and I think for you too, Joe, just to process some of this stuff together. And then we love hearing from the voices from our community. And so today we're going to talk about Sundays and spiritual formation Sundays and kind of like where it is now and where it's been and why we do what we do. And so I am so grateful that you've been cultivating that space with the team. It's not just you, but kind of that nurturing of that space, I think in this way for 2 years now. Is that right?
Yeah.
2 years now. So we're going to be like where we are now, and then maybe take a little look back at where we've been, and it'll be fun.
Well, I think it's funny too, because I just, I think about people think the Refuge is a church, which it is-ish, but is, and it's changed over the years. And so I think a lot of the space that I hold is a little bit confusing, because Refuge has, we've talked about this a lot in other episodes, but it's grown and changed and expanded. And there's still this Sunday piece, but it really started with that seed of trying to be a new sort of spiritual community, and which it is still. I think everything we do still is that, but Sunday nights, or the Sunday thing, is not the main thing anymore. And I think that's great. And that's in line with most of us and our values. But it is challenging sometimes. And so the space that I cultivate are kind of spiritual conversation, spiritual formation. And right now that looks like we gather every other Sunday night and we share dinner together. And then we have a time with our kids, go back with Stacy and have a kids time. And then the adults have a conversation. Kids are welcome, but they don't want to be with us usually. And then different people in the community. So I'm really kind of the pastor, but more facilitator of that space. And so I help coordinate the space. And so different people from our community bring conversation and volunteer. And so it's really, to use old school terminology, lay led. And we chat, and we sometimes have music. We usually share communion. But it's shifted over time, even since I've started doing it. And it's usually really surprising and beautiful. And whether there's 7 people there or 20 people there, it usually is goodness.
Yeah. It makes me think, I know every time there's goodness. Mm-hmm. And every time there's a wild range of people, even in its smallest form, it will always have a range of people who have different life experiences, some who are living in cars or outside, some who have PhDs, kind of all mixed up. Even when it's small, it's got that much breadth in it. And it's so powerful to me, actually, to have that space that has that much diversity in that direction. Because it's very unusual for those kinds of gatherings. Usually it's kind of a certain kind, in a lot of churches, there's a certain kind of people that want a certain kind of thing. And not that every church is like that. There's diversity within churches, but there's something about that socioeconomic difference that is, to me, really meaningful in the conversations, educational level, some of those things that just bring this richness to the conversation that's really healing and really awkward.
Yeah, definitely. Definitely. Yeah. And we've talked about this before in our podcast around small is plenty, but that is a challenge sometimes. And when it's a smaller group, and but yeah, it matters to the people who show up. And so it's worth it. But yeah, even since I've been there, it's changed so much. Because when I first came into the Refuge, I was doing like I made like a songbook. I had a songbook, and I would do like worship songs, and then we would have like a sermon. Sometimes, and sometimes a conversation, and so that looks so dramatically different now, and lots of reasons for that. But I think it's that, adaptability and flexibility. And, my question is always like, what is the community needing right now? And creating something out of that, versus like, I have a certain thing in my mind that it needs to look like, or needs to be, and it has to be a certain thing. So,
Yeah.
but that's loosey goosey, and not everyone appreciates that. And I get it, because our brains, we love like certainty, we love routine, and there's some of those things you can build into still flexible gatherings, but some of that is hard for folks who just like to show up and like know what's happening.
Yeah. And I think the dilemma, I mean, I'd love to hear more from you on this, is the dilemma is that I think lots of people would appreciate like not having to do that much and just kind of come. And that we can't pull that off.
Yeah.
Resource wise, because we have a lot of other people stretched, and I mean, there's a lot going on, and this is one avenue for spiritual formation. It is the one place in the refuge, I want to say this, where 100% of the time, somehow there is some sort of biblical, spiritual, grounding. It looks different. Every person who facilitates does it a different way, but it's free there. It's like, that there, it's going to happen. Mm-hmm. And then the other part is communion. The communion is like one of the parts of the, super loose refuge liturgy, but it is a liturgy, is the rhythm, and it is in there, and it is a staple. And that developed way back when, that on our weekend gathering, we were Sundays and our Saturdays, and Saturdays, and then back to Sundays in the evening. We've never met in the morning. And that there was something about the open table. And I can say that when I'm at Spiritual Formation Sunday, which isn't all the time, but when I am, I'm like, that open table is a beautiful thing. Mm. And it's just so pretty, because there's something about like all of our different ways, and there's just like no barriers to it, like a lot of people have experienced, not feeling worthy to take communion, or feeling repelled by it. You don't have to do it if you don't want to, but like, it's open, and it's this thing that kind of binds us together. And that it's really just an embodied practice. It's not sitting, it's not in our heads. It's something that we take and do together. And we've done it in so many creative ways. I mean, I love all the different ways that the communion has been shared at the refuge on Sundays. But I think it's just the simplicity of it. Mm-hmm. And then based on who's willing to help contribute to it, so, and as a convener of spaces, this is sometimes complicated, because people sign up to do it and then can't, or, it's hard. There's some openings, and, all of us who nurture spaces kind of fill in some of those, but we don't want that to be the default. Yeah. Because we want it to be shared together, and whatever. If it's not sustainable together, then asking the question, how can we make it sustainable together? And that's just a totally different model than church, as most people know it, in a system, because it's kind of like there's a group of people who are somehow paid. They're supposed to pull that shit off, and that it used to be like that, to be honest, at the refuge, and no one really made money or anything, but that was like the role of some of us as we planted the refuge, and we're curating when we only really had a weekend gathering. And we had a weekend gathering, and we had the House of Refuge at our house, which still exists, and somewhere down the line, we'll talk about that with some House of Refuge friends, because it's been really meaningful to people. But then I think we had somewhere in there in the first few years, advocates, learning lab, but that was kind of all we had. We didn't have anything else. That was a regular rhythm. So our Sunday gathering, Saturday, then for a while, was kind of like that anchoring point. But even then, everybody didn't come. It wasn't this one place where like everybody who was connected to the refuge always showed up. It was always kind of sporadic and interesting, even when we did it every single week. But we did it every single week for, many years since you've been here. And that didn't shift until coming out of COVID.
Yeah. Yeah. And it was kind of an interesting conversation because we've had different people hold that space over the years and the weekly space. And, but again, we've never had like a head lead pastor kind of typical, there's always just been team led and group led, but the structure wasn't set up for that to work well in some ways because it was like one person frantically planning every week and then like something would happen. And, and so since I've been there, and so coming out of COVID, when I agreed to take this role on, one of my things was like, I'm not going to do that like frantic thing, like, because I'm not good at it. Like I can do it, for 2 months and then I'll start forgetting things and I'll start dropping the ball. And, I can like dig in and be really good at it for like a short period of time. But over the long haul, like I'm just not built that way. And then also I think like it didn't feel like it was in line with who we were becoming as a community of this shared thing. And so starting that was, we had this conversation at Kathy's house for a couple of meetings with a group of people who were willing to help. And that was my condition. I was like, if you're going to be part of this conversation of reimagining what Sundays looks like, you have to be willing to do something.
It was awesome. And people came. We had a big group there. People were willing. Which I love.
And it wasn't do something like you have to like preach or teach or do music. It was like even chairs, but like you have to be willing to contribute to it in some way if you want to have a voice in this conversation. And I feel like that's fair because I think having an open table and conversations at the refuge is a beautiful thing. And sometimes we've had open tables where people have very strong opinions about things and then they don't come. And we like shift stuff around these strong opinions and then those people don't even show up.
Yeah.
So that was my thing is like, okay, so 2 summers ago, it's like, we're coming out of, COVID, like, let's reimagine. What does this look like? What does Sunday look like for us as a community now? And it was beautiful. It was like brainstorming ideas, brave soul throughout the idea of like not meeting every week. And that really resonated. It's like, maybe if we didn't meet every week, we wouldn't have to like feel like we're hustling so much. And it would actually be like really nice to see everyone and it wouldn't feel so heavy. And other things of, like what elements are feel like core and what things maybe don't. And, is it something that we could share together and like have different people share something? And, so what's emerged is, it's on its way to something really good, I think. But it also is, it's not as anchory as it used to feel, I think, in some ways, because it was every week and someone else was doing everything. So you could just come, it could just come with your family and then, or just come alone and then just like leave. And like now to me, community is more than that. And you can, there's weeks like, 12 weeks out of the year or 30 weeks out of the year, you can just come. But there's one of them that you're going to be bringing something or several of them that you're going to be bringing something because it's contributing to the community in some way. And so that's what I'm working on building right now, and we'll see. But I'm always open to like, if it's not serving the community, then let's revisit it again. But let's give it a shot for a few years and see if this actually is like what's meeting needs for folks.
And that's what I really do love. And I said it previously, and I'll just say it again. That's really your superpower, in my opinion, of just like really being willing to ask those questions and to have it come from the community versus someone in the role of nurturing. And so, and that honestly, I mean, I can say as somebody who's been here since the beginning, and we've gone through different leadership kinds of machinations, that it's so healthy. And sometimes even, I'm not used to it all the way, even though I am really community driven. When it has come to certain things, I think that has been in our history of just our DNA of where we came from in church and how it used to be. I mean, there used to be more teaching and preaching, and there's some people today that probably wish that it was a little bit more like that. And then there's other people like, nope, 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 nope. That's why they stopped coming. I hear all the different things along the way. Didn't want to eat or have to like have conversation around the table, just want to be able to enter in. Some people that have had huge faith shifts and just like the Bible's just too hard, even in the smallest dose right now. And that just this movement of all these different things. But the part that I think is so healthy and what I love, and then I'm just going to say is so risky, is to be open-handed with it and not have it be this idol, this, I want to be careful of language and not using things that we don't really use anymore, but like this just idea that it's like we have to because of convention and because that's what you do if you are a faith community, a church. And we are a faith community. Like people need to know that. I'm not afraid to say that. Like faith is in our roots. We are, in our language, we've evolved into better language of being a hub for healing community, social action, and creative collaboration. This is important, inspired by the ways of Jesus. We gather around shared values, and those values are presence, engagement, transformation, welcome, creativity, and celebration. And I like naming those, I like saying those because they cross everything and they're embedded in Spiritual Formation Sunday. And so like to not be afraid of that. And I think that when we only had that, which was, we used to only have that, I had a lot of trouble with it because it was really hard on some people because it was such a hard place to hold. And, but it was also, and it was so hard to pull off. I just need to say this out loud to everybody listening. I think people know this, but I'm not positive. It was a lot to pull that off. And it was still far less than any regular church. I mean, I was on a big church staff and I knew what it took to put all that energy. But for our little community to do that every week, and to really, like, we did so many interesting things and we set certain ways and had themes. I mean, Jenny was a huge part of this. She would spend hours just creating the space to be able to enter in. And all those things were awesome for that season. I they were beautiful. But, Jenny then ended up not being here because she had to go take care of her family in another state. And so we just didn't have, and we didn't go, oh my gosh, we have to find somebody to do that exact thing, that exact way to keep this sucker rolling. We just were willing to let go of some of that. And I remember when we decided that summer camp during the summer became a thing. This was probably in 2012-ish, 11 or 12, because the first ones were at the Grange. I think maybe 2011 is in there somewhere, but we started doing this series where it was more skills and workshop-y style to just give ourselves a break from having to coordinate all the elements. And then we're like, okay, well, why don't we just make all summer be that, to just ease back? Well, I just want to name that's weird in Churchland.
For sure.
And that is weird. And then we have certain rhythms of feasts and parties, and we have multiple barbecues, on Memorial Day and Labor Day. And then we have beauty night, and then we have trunk or treat, and then we have a Thanksgiving feast and a Christmas feast on the fourth week of Advent and post-Christmas bingo. I mean, so it was a lot to do. And when the question got asked, I'll never forget it, in our living room with you facilitating, like you held that space for us. That was big space to hold, because you're like, here we are. And what does everybody, these people are committed, not just to provide input. And I love that some people said, this is what I wish, but you know what? I don't come all the time and I don't actually want to work to make it happen.
Yeah.
So I don't expect you guys to do it.
That was nice. Yeah.
That was magical. I mean, I was just filled with gratitude for that humility
Yeah.
in community, because they can own that they do wish we met every week and did it a certain way, but they just understand that they don't have the capacity. And so they don't like put it on you or on me, you know, or on whoever to like make it happen. And so I loved that. And then I loved just the willingness to ask the question, do we actually have to do this every single week? And then the first question, the answer was, no, I don't think so. Then it was, do we just do it once a month? And then it was like, no, that's not enough. And we're forming kids. And so the kids need something that is just theirs, and they have a place for their formation alongside us. They're mixed up with us, but they do like their special place to go and learn and do stuff together and share. And that, you know, formation in the same way there looks very different than Sunday school at other churches, but it has a point, you know, and it's forming.
Yeah. So I think that one of the things that's interesting, I was listening to a podcast the other day. It was talking about progressive Christian communities versus evangelical Christian communities, and why a lot of progressive communities are dying, and they're all dying kind of. And so, but this is going to get a little bit heady for a second, but one of the podcasters was talking about how, you know, in these progressive communities, like people say they want their own hermeneutical authority, which is like, I'm going to figure this out with my relationships to my spirituality or the Bible. I'm going to, like, you have that inside of yourself. And how, you know, what is reassuring for most traditional Christian communities is that there's this external authority where it's like the pastor or the priest, or, you know, is telling me what this means and telling me what to believe. And that gives people comfort and reassurance. And so this guy was just saying his theory is that one of the reasons a lot of progressive Christian communities aren't doing super well regarding numbers is that people, they say they want that. They say they want their own hermeneutical authority, but they actually really don't. You know, it's like, I just don't want to believe these things that are conservative, that are triggering, but I still want you to tell me what to think, just in line with my, you know, social values or my political values. And it just reminded me of our community, because I think it's super hard for folks to come in, and we really do. And that's like, I never had that language around it, but that's a huge passion that I have, is for people to own their own hermeneutical authority. And like, so that's a big word, but like for people to know that like Spirit is inside of them and they can figure this out, and in not just in isolation, in community. And so, and that it's like open. And so our friend can bring a passage about trees and mycelium and how that connects to community and God and spirituality. And our other friend, like can bring a passage about peacemaking and nonviolence and how that connects to community and the story of Jesus. And we can share these things, but it's not this like, I have this point that you need to believe that this is what this is, and I'm the arbiter of truth in your life. It's like, no, like you are the arbiter of truth and the community, and like reading scripture together in community and understanding it together, not in isolation. And then also that trust that like, it's going to be okay. And you can figure it out. We can figure it out together. And the figure it out part isn't like find the answer. It's like delve into the mystery, delve into the question. And like, I don't know where this quote came from, but I heard it years ago, and it's like, God is not a problem to be solved. God is a mystery to be explored.
Yeah.
And so that's my passion for Sundays, and the spiritual formation part of the refuge is that people can really own that hermeneutical authority in themselves, but it's not it's not human nature to want to do that, and it's very uncomfortable. And I think it's a small group of people that really want to do that, and that's okay. I mean, I think like physiologically it's uncomfortable, and maybe it's more helpful to have like certainty and have someone who's like telling you what to think, not in a, I'm not saying that in a pejorative way, but like it's just how our brains work. It feels safer. But I think there's a small group of people who that doesn't feel safe anymore, and it doesn't feel true and authentic to them anymore. And I think that's our little weird niche at the refuge on Sundays, is it's a space for people who like still want to engage with the spiritual aspect of Jesus and the spiritual aspect of the Bible, or they're the spiritual part of themselves, but also can't do the authority thing anymore as far as coming from outside of themselves.
Yes. Oh my gosh, that was so helpful. It was so helpful to me just even to hear it and just be reminded, honestly. And I just really resonate with what you're saying and how that is really countercultural. And it makes sense why progressive churches are struggling, like they all are. And it's so confusing because this is counter. The whole thing is counter to what culture created and what you and me and our friends and are trying to create is this space where the formation comes not because someone tells us something, but because we're entering into the experience together.
Yeah.
And have permission to do that, and that it's forming to drive there on a Sunday night and have some weird little food around the tables and then move into a living room with some communion elements and a few candles in the middle of a table, and then listen, not to person say what everyone needs to know, but to share, like, this is what I've got tonight and what I'm wrestling with and learning and exploring, and then have people be able to engage. And Joe, I am so grateful that we have that space. And because of you and the group that's all there are willing to hold it loosely and ask the question, what next and what's missing and how, and evolve.
Yeah.
And that is like truly a beautiful thing.
Yeah, and I think it's always evolving, and even right now I'm sensing like we kind of like threw stuff to the wayside, and now there are some anchoring things that we're going to need, I think, to do, and not rituals, but rituals are, I think, are helpful. But just small. They don't have to be complicated, but there's just kind of small anchoring things like checking in, and like we do communion, but a few other small kind of anchoring things that we all hold together. And that the person who's sharing that night can kind of hug them in a way, and
Yeah.
so we'll work on that, I think, this summer, and figure out what are those little pieces that we can kind of hold together. But I think sometimes you have to like shed everything to reimagine, because it's kind of what we talked about, old wineskins and new wine. It's like it's so hard to, if you have this old thing, like to try to reimagine unless you're willing to just let go of everything, and then that's scarier. But then you can actually build what serves the community rather than what maybe just feels comfortable.
Yeah. It makes me think of that Soren Kierkegaard quote that says, I think he says, all of spiritual formation is really just waking up. And, like that's really just like awakening parts of us and being open. To me, waking up is kind of like being open. Yeah. And not protected and not hold, like not clenched fists, but like open hands and open heart and open eyes to our heart and our souls. And that's what I love, is that everything is formation.
Yeah.
It's not exclusive to these 2 Sundays a month, but that we need those. They're anchoring. They're anchoring. And when I'm there, I feel grateful for that anchoring. And I feel grateful as a community that we have let ourselves evolve. Yeah. And we'll keep moving it forward somewhere else. And as the community listens and decides and trust that. So thank you.
Yeah. Well, and if anybody wants to chat with me, that some of this is, it can sound a little woo-woo, but it's all rooted in science and complexity theory, complexity theory-based leadership, which is what I did my master's thesis in. Mm-hmm. And so if anybody wants to talk to me about that, let me know. I'm happy to nerd out with you about systems and complexity and like emergence, and how we often try to create things by control, but like there's actually, if we can create more simplicity, like beautiful things can emerge if we trust the community. So yeah, I think that I'm grateful for this season, and we'll see what happens.
Yes. Oh my gosh. I feel like we need to have just a full conversation on that. And maybe that'll be the fun time. We bring our friend Pam Wilhelms into the conversation between all this, you two, we all just need to listen to you and her in this like processing of this systems thing that is so important. But Joe's invitation, take her up on it. And I love that you bring that to us. And, it's wild and it's beautiful and it's organic and it's anchored and it's weird. And it's so, so sweet. It's like a little touch of this weird, wild thing in the world that I think is kind of way back when, in the beginning of the Jesus story, somehow fits. Like sometimes when we're together, I think that, oh yeah, this is probably a little bit what it looked like.
Yeah. Well, and just those verses in Acts that talk about, I think it's 2 and 4, but just the believers gathered and like no one was in need, and they had all these things. And that's one of my favorite phrases that I say about the Refuge is like, everything we do is church, but sometimes we meet on Sundays. And like, to me, church in the truest sense, like that Acts 2 church that is like caring for people, who is like doing a soup train when someone has a surgery, that's like actually like helping someone, get an ID so that they can get some work or get some housing, and like the holistic aspect of that to me is church. And so Sundays is part of it. It's like one of the things that we do that's spiritual, and it does have a specific like focus around conversations about spirituality and the Bible and stuff, but that's just one thing. Like a broader thing that we do, and like that everything we do is church in the truest sense, in my opinion, like where it's people are heard, connecting, cared for, given practical things like food and showers, given community, given a listening ear, that's church. And sometimes we meet on Sundays.
Yeah. Best line ever. And especially for this conversation. Okay, so we're wrapping up. What are you leaving with? A little more or a little less?
I just feel warm, like a little warmth in my heart, just for the ability to be part of something that actually is willing to risk this, because there's not a lot of communities that would be. And so I'm just, I feel grateful, and just like a warmness in my chest.
The word that came forward for me is just sweet. Like I just feel a sweetness. It's similar, the same idea, like just a sweetness and gratitude, a sweet gratitude for an openness for the community to hold it loosely, and then also be really dedicated to it at the same time, because these spaces matter, and I'm grateful for it. And I'm so grateful to get to do this with you. Thanks for listening. Nerd out with Joe. And then be part of those conversations. If you're in the Refuge, and just want to like share. And then if you're not, if you're like outside of the refuge listening in, I just think like the big thing is just going, what could it look like for us in our community? That's like honest about who we are, instead of trying to be maybe what we're not based on who's in the room.
Yeah. And it won't look like what we do because it's us, but it'll look like who you are. So
Love it.